Operating from carrier decks was the most demanding flying in World War II, and here's every major naval fighter designed for this unforgiving environment. American carrier fighters. Grumman F6F Wildcat, the fighter that held the line when America needed it most. The Wildcat was outclassed by the Zero in almost every measure: slower, less maneuverable, shorter range. But it was tough. Grumman's rugged construction and self-sealing fuel tanks meant Wildcats survived hits that would destroy Zeros. At the Coral Sea and Midway, Wildcat pilots fought with tactics that exploited their strengths, diving attacks using superior speed in a dive, then refusing to dogfight. The thatch-weave defensive maneuver allowed Wildcats to protect each other against more agile opponents. The Wildcat bought time for better fighters to arrive, and that was enough. Grumman F6F Hellcat, the Zero Killer. Grumman designed the Hellcat specifically to beat the Zero, incorporating lessons from combat. It was faster, could outdive any Japanese fighter, and was incredibly tough. The Hellcat achieved a 19-to-1 kill ratio against Japanese aircraft, the best of any American fighter. It was easy to fly, allowing newly trained pilots to be effective quickly, critical as the Navy expanded massively. Hellcats dominated from 1943 onward, giving American carriers absolute air superiority. Over 12,000 were built, equipping most Navy fighter squadrons by war's end. Vought F4, U Corsair. The bent-wing bird was the fastest piston engine fighter of World War II. That inverted gull wing allowed a shorter landing gear while keeping the massive propeller clear of the deck. Initially deemed unsuitable for carrier operations due to poor visibility and tricky landing characteristics, the Corsair flew from land bases with the Marines. Eventually, the Navy mastered carrier operations, and the Corsair became devastating, fast, heavily armed, and able to carry bombs for ground attack. It achieved an 11-to-1 kill ratio and served into the jet age. Grumman F6F Bearcat. Designed to be the ultimate piston engine carrier fighter, the Bearcat arrived too late for significant World War II combat. It was smaller and lighter than the Hellcat, with incredible climb rate and agility. The Bearcat could outturn anything and accelerate faster than jets initially. Only a handful reached combat squadrons before Japan surrendered, but it showed what could have been achieved if the war continued. Brewster F2A Buffalo, America's first monoplane carrier fighter, was a disaster. Slow, poorly armed, and prone to catching fire, the Buffalo was obsolete when war began. At Midway, Marine Buffaloes were massacred by Zeros. 13 of 21 were shot down. The survivors called it a death trap. The Buffalo proved that being first doesn't mean being good, and it was replaced as quickly as possible. Japanese carrier fighters. Mitsubishi a 6M0, the shock of 1941. When the Zero appeared over Pearl Harbor and throughout the Pacific, Allied pilots couldn't believe what they faced. The Zero could outturn, outclimb, and outrange anything the Allies had. Its 20mm cannons were devastating, and its range allowed escort missions thought impossible. For 6 months, the Zero dominated. But Japanese engineers had sacrificed everything for performance. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks. Once Allied pilots learned not to dogfight and exploit the Zero's weaknesses, it became vulnerable. By 1943, the Zero was outclassed, but remained in production because Japan had nothing better ready. Late-war Zeros faced Hellcats and Corsairs with poorly trained pilots, and the results were slaughter. Mitsubishi a 5M. Before the Zero, the A5M established Japanese naval aviation supremacy over China. This open cockpit fighter was maneuverable and reliable, giving pilots confidence that would carry into World War II. By 1941, it was obsolete, relegated to training, but some served in second-line roles throughout the war. The A5M proved Japanese designers could create world-class fighters. Mitsubishi a 7M Reppu, the Zero's intended replacement, designed to combine better speed and armor with retained agility. The A7M was impressive in testing, but plagued by engine problems and bombing raids on factories. Only 9 were completed before war's end. It represented Japanese potential that circumstances never allowed to flourish, a superior fighter that arrived too late. Kawanishi N1K1J Shiden. Originally a floatplane fighter, the land-based version became one of Japan's best late-war fighters. While not primarily a carrier aircraft, the Shiden showed what Japanese designers could achieve when given time. It could match American fighters in performance, but arrived too late and in too few numbers. Some Navy pilots flew Shidens, proving it could have been a worthy Zero successor. British carrier fighters. Supermarine Seafire. The navalized Spitfire looked perfect for carriers, but had problems. The narrow landing gear made deck landings difficult, and the structure wasn't designed for carrier stresses. Landing hooks frequently tore off. But when it worked, the Seafire was magnificent, fast, agile, and well-armed. Seafires operated in the Mediterranean, covering landings and defending convoys. The challenge was getting them aboard intact. Pilots joked that landing a Seafire on a carrier was harder than fighting Germans. Hawker Sea Hurricane. The Hurricane adapted for carriers was more successful than the Seafire for naval operations. The wider landing gear and rugged construction made it suitable for carrier decks. Sea Hurricanes defended Arctic convoys and operated in the Mediterranean. While not as fast as land-based fighters, they were adequate against German reconnaissance aircraft and bombers. CAM ships launched Sea Hurricanes from catapults to defend convoys. One-way missions where pilots ditched afterward, hoping for rescue. Fairey Fulmar. Britain's first purpose-built carrier fighter was obsolete from the start. The requirement for a navigator meant a heavy two-seater that couldn't dogfight effectively. The Fulmar was slower than bombers it was supposed to intercept, but it achieved some successes in the Mediterranean, shooting down Italian aircraft, and its long range was useful for fleet defense. The Fulmar showed that British carrier fighter requirements were flawed, prioritizing the wrong characteristics. Fairey Firefly. A reconnaissance fighter that was too heavy and slow for pure fighter duties, but useful for fleet defense and ground attack. The Firefly served in the Pacific alongside American carriers, conducting strikes on Japanese targets. It was reliable and could take damage, making it valuable despite limited fighter performance. Post-war, Fireflies served in Korea, proving their utility in ground attack roles. Grumman F6F Wildcat, British Martlet. Britain received Wildcats through Lend-Lease, naming them Martlets initially. These tough fighters defended convoys and supported operations when British designs were inadequate. The Wildcat gave the fleet air arm capability it desperately needed. British pilots appreciated its ruggedness, even if they found it less refined than Spitfires. Grumman F6F Hellcat, British. The Royal Navy received hundreds of Hellcats, which equipped many squadrons. British Hellcats operated in the Pacific alongside American carriers, conducting strikes on Japanese targets. The Hellcat gave Britain modern carrier fighter capability when indigenous designs couldn't match it. Vought F4, U Corsair, British. Britain mastered carrier operations with the Corsair before the US Navy, proving it could operate from carriers successfully. British Corsairs flew in the Pacific, providing fleet defense and ground attack. The Fleet Air Arm showed Americans that the Corsair was carrier-capable with proper techniques. German naval fighters. Messerschmitt Bf-109T, a navalized Bf-109 designed for Germany's never-completed carrier, Graf Zeppelin. The 109T had folding wings, strengthened structure, and a tailhook for carrier operations. About 70 were built, but with no carrier, They operated from land bases in Norway, defending against Allied raids. The 109T showed German capability to adapt fighters for naval use, but the carrier's cancellation made them pointless. They served adequately from land, proving the basic modifications worked. Arado R-197, a biplane fighter designed for Graf Zeppelin before the Bf-109T. The R-197 was obsolete when designed, and only prototypes were built. It represented German conservatism in early carrier fighter thinking, before realizing modern carriers needed modern fighters. The program's failure was fortunate. A biplane fighter in 1940 would have been massacred. Italian naval fighters. Region Re. .2001 OR, an attempted carrier fighter for Italy's proposed carriers. The Re. .2001 was a capable fighter adapted with folding wings and arrestor gear. Italy never completed its carriers, and only prototypes were built. The Re. .2001 OR showed Italian capability to develop carrier aircraft, but industrial limitations and strategic confusion prevented success. Fiat G.50 Biz. Some G.50 fighters were tested for carrier operations, but Italy's carrier programs never progressed far enough for deployment. The G.50 was an adequate fighter, but not exceptional, and carriers would have demanded better. Italy's naval aviation focused on seaplanes and land-based aircraft instead. Specialized and experimental naval fighters. Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver, primarily a dive bomber, but some variants carried additional fighters armament and could engage in air combat if necessary. The Helldiver was controversial. Pilots called it the Beast, criticizing its handling. But it served effectively as a strike aircraft, replacing the Dauntless despite its reputation. Douglas SBD Dauntless, the dive bomber that won Midway, could defend itself effectively. Dauntlesses shot down multiple Zeros through good gunnery and aggressive maneuvering. While not a fighter, its combat record earned respect. Dauntless crews proved that determined bomber pilots could fight when necessary. Grumman TBF Avenger, the torpedo bomber that could fight back. Avengers had defensive armament that allowed them to engage fighters. At the Battle of Midway, Avengers fought their way through Zero attacks, despite heavy losses. Later, radar-equipped Avengers hunted submarines and conducted night strikes, showing versatility beyond torpedo attack. Vought SB-2 U Vindicator, an obsolete dive bomber by 1942, but some served in the early war. Vindicators at Midway attacked Japanese carriers despite being outclassed. The aircraft proved that obsolete types could still contribute when crews were determined, though losses were heavy. Grumman F6F Tigercat. The most powerful piston engine fighter America built barely saw World War II. The twin-engine Tigercat was designed for large carriers, combining incredible firepower with speed. It arrived too late for significant combat, but showed the direction carrier fighters were heading before jets made piston engines obsolete. Curtiss SC Seahawk, a late-war scout float plane launched from battleships and cruisers. While not a carrier fighter, it performed reconnaissance over the Pacific. The Seahawk was sleek and modern, representing advanced floatplane design. It served in the war's final year, conducting scouting missions over Japanese waters. Kyushu J-7W Shinden. Japan's Radical Canard fighter was designed for defending the home islands, including carrier use. The Shinden had the propeller in back and the engine in front, a reversed configuration. Only prototypes flew before war's end. It represented desperate Japanese innovation, trying anything to find an advantage. Mitsubishi J-2M Raiden, primarily a land-based interceptor, but some Navy pilots flew it defending carriers and bases. The Raiden was fast and heavily armed, designed to destroy B-29s. While not carrier-capable, it served with Navy units when they operated from land bases after most carriers were sunk. Nakajima A6M2N, the Floatplane Zero defended seaplane bases where carriers couldn't operate. While covered in the seaplane fighter video, it deserves mention here as it was operated by Navy units. The float-equipped Zero showed Japanese determination to maintain fighter defense everywhere. Camship Hurricanes. Britain launched Sea Hurricanes from catapult-equipped merchant ships to defend convoys. These one-way missions required pilots to catapult off, engage enemy aircraft, then ditch in the ocean, hoping for rescue. Camship Hurricane pilots showed incredible courage, accepting likely death to protect convoys. Several achieved victories before ditching, proving the desperate measure worked despite its cost. Eastern Front naval fighters. Soviet naval aviation. The Soviet Navy operated land-based fighters for coastal defense rather than carriers. Yak fighters, Lei-GG fighters, and MiG fighters defended naval bases and supported amphibious operations. Soviet naval aviation focused on supporting land operations rather than carrier warfare, as the USSR had no operational carriers. Float Zero variants. Beyond the A6M2N, Japan developed other float-equipped fighter variants throughout the war. These defended bases across the Pacific, from the Aleutians to the South Pacific. Float fighters allowed Japan to maintain air defense at locations where building airfields was impossible. Prototype carrier fighters. Grumman XF-5F Skyrocket, an experimental twin-engine carrier fighter, the XF-5F was fast and heavily armed. Only prototypes were built, as single-engine fighters proved adequate. The Skyrocket showed Grumman exploring radical designs, even if they didn't reach production. Vought XF-5U Flying Pancake, the most radical carrier fighter design, with a nearly circular wing. The XF-5U was supposed to combine extreme maneuverability with high speed. Only prototypes were built before the program ended with the arrival of jets. The Flying Pancake represented ambitious experimentation that jets rendered obsolete. Curtiss XF-14C, a mixed propulsion fighter combining a piston engine and jet engine. The XF-14C was designed to boost speed while retaining long range. Only one was built, arriving too late to matter. It represented the transition period when designers tried to combine old and new propulsion. Ryan FR Fireball, the first carrier fighter combining piston and jet engines. The FR-1 used a piston engine for normal flight and a jet for combat boost. Only a handful saw service before war's end. The Fireball showed the future. Jets would replace pistons entirely, making hybrid designs a brief evolutionary dead end. Flettner Fell 282 Kolibri. Not a fighter, but worth mentioning. Germany's helicopter scouted for the Kriegsmarine. The tiny helicopter could operate from ships, providing reconnaissance. While unsuccessful, it showed early attempts to bring rotary-wing aircraft to naval warfare. Late war developments. Jet fighters on carriers. By war's end, Britain was experimenting with jet operations from carriers. The de Havilland Vampire conducted deck trials, proving jets could operate from carriers. This experimentation led to post-war jet carrier aviation, showing the war's end coincided with carrier fighter revolution. Rocket-assisted takeoffs. Some late-war carrier fighters used JATO, jet-assisted takeoff, rockets to shorten takeoff distance. These rockets gave extra thrust for heavily loaded fighters to get airborne from short carrier decks. The technology proved useful and continued post-war. Kamikaze conversions. Japan converted many fighters to kamikaze aircraft, removing everything except fuel and explosives. While not traditional fighters, these one-way missions represented Japan's desperation. Zero fighters, once the world's best, became expendable suicide weapons as Japan's situation became hopeless. From Wildcats holding the line at Midway to Hellcats dominating the Pacific skies, naval fighters operated in the war's most demanding environment, where mechanical failure meant death, where landing required catching a wire on a pitching deck, and where the distance home was measured in hundreds of miles of empty ocean, proving that carrier aviation required not just excellent aircraft, but exceptional pilots willing to fight where there was no margin for error.